A quick overview for this experiment. Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov was researching the salivation in dogs in response to being fed. He inserted a small test tube into the cheeks of each dog to measure the saliva when the dogs were fed. He used an unconditioned stimulus, which is the food, an unconditioned response or reflex, which is the salivation that occurs when a dog sees food. To create a conditioned response, Pavlov used a neutral stimulus, which is the bell. Before conditioning, the dog had no response to the bell. During the experiment, he would ring the bell with the presence of the food. He continued to do this until only the ringing of the bell will cause the dogs to begin to salivate.
Okay, so I will be talking about the hypothesis part of the Ivan Pavlov and his dogs experiment. So the hypothesis is if dogs are susceptible to conditioned responses, for example, the drooling, then a dog who is regularly exposed to the same neutral stimulus, which is the bell or the ting, before it receives food will associate this neutral stimulus with the act of eating. So that was the hypothesis. And when I was reading this and going over the whole experiment, something that I kept thinking about this whole project was that when you take your dogs to get trained, they use the clicker method, which is like you click it, the dog does what it's command to do, and then he knows that the treat is coming after they hear the click. So then what was the purpose of this? Well, the funny thing is that originally Pavlov was not studying classical conditioning. He actually came across it. At first, he was just studying the animal's gastric system. And on the slide, I included the definition of what gastric system is, which is the digestion and breakdown of food. So then he basically noticed that the dogs would produce saliva when they heard or smelled food in anticipation of feeding. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But the whole purpose of this experiment is classic conditioning.
Hello, I'm gonna go over slide 4, which is about the experimental groups and the control groups. So the experimental group for this experiment would be conducting the experiment with both the conditioned stimuli, which is the bell, and the unconditioned stimuli, which is the food. The control group would be having another group of dogs, and for these dogs, only the conditioned stimuli would be presented, which is the bell. So I have two pictures here, and the first one is for the experimental group. So the conductor would have this group of dogs, and he would ring the bell, and then right after that, he would bring food in. And over time, the dogs would learn that the ring of the bell means that they're going to be fed, and this is what causes the salivation towards the bell. For the second picture, the conductor would only ring a bell, but it would mean absolutely nothing to the dog because it's just a ring, and they weren't taught or trained with anything to mean anything. So the bell had no meaning. So this is why there was no salivation, and that's why there's an X on the dog's tongue. But Pavlov wanted to test that a dog could respond to a neutral stimuli, and a neutral stimuli is something that means absolutely nothing to the dogs. So it could be like just a ring of a bell or a honk, just making a random noise, which means nothing. So he wanted to prove that dogs could respond to something like that with a conditioned response. And a conditioned response is an automatic response that has been established through training. And this is what they actually got for the experimental group. So the salivation was the conditioned response because it had been established through the training of the food. So they learned that the ring of the bell meant food, and that's what caused the dogs to salivate automatically every time that they heard the bell. To see a difference in the groups, one group needed to be trained to react to the bell, and the other one would be left alone. The control group is used to prove that if the unconditional stimuli is not conditioned with the bill, then the dogs have no reaction at all towards this neutral stimuli, which is the bill. So if there wasn't any food presented after ringing the bill would mean absolutely nothing to the dogs, and there would be no response or no salivation in this case.
So what are the results of their testing? Pavlov found that an object or an event can trigger a conditioned response. So in his experiment, Pavlov demonstrated when the presence of a bowl of dog food would cause a dog to salivate. However, in the beginning of his experiment, the dogs started to associate his lab assistant with the food, causing Pavlov to begin to use a neutral stimulus. So while giving the dogs the food, Pavlov would ring the bell. The dogs would begin to salivate because of the food. And he repeated this procedure, resulting the dogs to associate the bell with the food. So without the sight of dog food, the ringing of the bell would cause the dogs to salivate, thus creating a new conditioned response. And in the picture that's on this slide, it kind of is just showing what I had just said. So the dog has an unconditioned response with the unconditioned stimulus. He used the neutral stimulus, the bell. Dogs didn't have any response during. He had them both, and he began the conditioned response, so resulting afterwards. It's just kind of just showing it on the picture as a visual.
My name is Veronica Villegas, and I will be reading slide 6. What are the long-term implications of the research? The long-term implications of the research is that with the right conditioning and a lot of patience, you can make a hungry dog respond to neutral stimuli by salivating on cue in a way that is both predictable and scientifically quantifiable. Pavlov's dog experiments are still discussed today and have influenced many later ideas in psychology. John B. Watson, a U.S. psychologist, was impressed by Pavlov's findings and reproduced classical conditioning in Little Albert experiment. The Little Albert experiment is very similar, which is when a subject was unethically conditioned to associate furry stimuli such as rabbits with a loud noise and subsequently developed a fear of rats. Pavlov's research has also helped recognize an important unconscious influence in human behavior. It has helped the theory to be recognized and applied in many real-life situations, from training dogs to creating associations in today's product advertisement. If you see the examples on your right, you will see that just like Pavlov did, he rang a bell to give the dog food and the dog would salivate. You'll see that the child's being awarded for making sure that his area is cleaned up. That shows the same example. And then you'll also see where, the parent, there's different types of behavior learning. And you can see that there's one observational learning, which the parent is showing the child how to do something. So the child is learning that behavior as well.
Okay, I will also be doing the questions for what did you learn. I have listed question 1 and question 2, and then a slide dedicated to the explanations. So I'm just gonna read over them. From the experiment, we can sum up that learning occurs through interactions within the environment, and the environment shapes. And the answer for this would clearly be behavior, because throughout the whole experiment, we see the cause and effect of how the dogs behave based on different responses and stimuli. Okay, and then question 2 is, During the research, Pavlov discovered a fundamental type of learning known as, and the answer would be classic conditioning. I know it feels a little bit repetitive, but it's very important that students grasp the concept of classic conditioning because it is something that can be confused by other silly answer choices like the ones I have listed. I was actually gonna put like conditioning air, and yeah, that's it.